I have these 5 interview questions that are like when you go for a job.
Yeah.
And then I ask them.
Yeah.
But like not as if you're interviewing me for the job, because it was fun one time when I did it to Alex Austin.
Mm-hmm.
But then I forget the interview questions every time. But I actually.
You wrote them down?
I know.
Googled them.
I Googled and I saw the link I clicked and I clicked on that. So there's that.
Okay.
Or we could just talk about procedurally generated craziness like we were just talking about before.
Oh, either one's fine.
We could do a mixture of both.
Yeah, we could like skim
All
through
right.
those top 5s.
Okay.
They should be easy.
If Pete's in there. You are pretty attractive, I gotta say.
I should have probably tweeted about this, but I need to shave really bad.
Do you want to tweet?
I noticed today that
Twitch TV Indie Mega Booth.
Give me a sec.
Here, want me to send it to you?
Yeah.
Skype. Damn. And then if there's time at the end, I'll probably switch over to my channel, but if there's time at the end of this one, then I will just hop on. Even though I've been doing Duskers a lot lately, I might hop on a virus named Tom, because I'm doing new levels for the Vita version, and it's on my brain right now, so I could talk a little bit about that. All right. Well, first, I guess, what makes the most sense, right, is who are you, what do you do? Just, it's for the people.
Where's... okay. My name's Lexie. I'm a programmer. I made the game Dustforce, which is a acrobatic platformer that came out on PC, Mac, Linux, Xbox 360, PS3, and PS Vita. And we're working on our next game called Spire, which should be ready in hopefully 2 years. We've been working on it 2 years already, and we've got another 2 years to go. So we'll see how it goes.
Cool, cool.
But yeah, so we're part of Hitbox team is the company, and it originally was 4 of us, and now we're down to 3, because one of the guys, the engine programmer, is working on his own 3D rendering engine, and that's not going to be ready for Spire, so we're using Unity for our next project. Well, he makes a really good rendering engine.
For game 3.
For hopefully game 3, yeah.
It's good to think that we would make it past these games. All right.
Yeah.
So let's go into our top 5 interview questions.
Oh,
Ah,
okay.
shit, I already did that one. Tell me about yourself.
All right.
Damn it.
Should I repeat?
No. No. All right. What do you think is your greatest weakness?
The correct answer to that in an interview is I don't have any. But
I don't know, man. I think in an interview they'd be like, all right.
No. The correct answer is just like
I work too hard.
I work too hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my weakness. That's. I'm sure everyone else knows this one.
I've got like 3 backed up in case you don't have any.
It's gotta be something to do with. Oh, I'm like fucking horribly. I don't know if I'm honest with. I'm really unorganized, and I like get really. I'm really bad at business work. Like, if we have taxes or something we have to do, or I have to talk to my accountant and like give them all this paperwork, I put it off till the last second, and then I still don't do it, and then the government fines us all this money because I didn't hand paperwork on time. So I'm really bad with organizing that stuff, and like business decisions and like anything to do with business, I get like a lot of anxiety about it, and I just can't handle it.
How do you guys handle that? Because there's 3 of you, right? Is it like you guys are just like, this is your job, or do you guys kind of...
So I'm meant to do all the like accounting tax stuff because that got dumped on me. Terrence...
You had a spreadsheet program at the time or something?
Terrence, he does generally most of the emails from like people emailing us about maybe an upcoming bundle or something. Occasionally I'll chime in on those if they're like game related, like someone's got a problem with the game, I'll help them fix that problem. And then Woodley doesn't do anything to do with business stuff, he just does art.
Right.
He's probably worse than me when it comes to like anxiety with commitment and obligations, so out of the three of us, we're pretty bad at that stuff.
Do you think that 3 people is like optimal?
No.
No?
I don't know. It depends on what you're working on. Like, a small game, 2 people is great. 3 people is also good if you can cover all your
Right.
bases. Like with Dustforce, we had an engine programmer. I did all the gameplay programming. We had an artist that did all the art, and then Terrence did all the music and sound effects.
Right.
So we had everything covered. Oh, and then we had Mary helped us with marketing. So we had pretty much everything covered. So that was really good because we do it all in a small team. Next project though is Terrence is now doing music and programming because he's actually a programmer. He's better than me at programming. I'm doing all the gameplay programming again, and then Woodley's doing all the art, and we're using Unity to replace Matt.
Right.
So I really wish we had more people. Like it, with a game the size we're trying to make, Spire,
it's
I
pretty
really
ambitious.
wish we had more people. Like either one more artist just to help with making assets, so Woodley can kind of spend more time just helping me with game design and coming up with concepts.
Right.
And like being able to do like a sketch or something and be like, hey, make this for me. Like make this simple prop that is not too important to the game, but here, model this and texture it.
Right.
Or just doing animation, because
Yeah.
like Woodley has to do so many different jobs, like coming up with the ideas, modeling it, unwrapping it, texturing it. If it's animated, he's got to skin it, rig it, and then animate it. There's so many jobs where normally in a bigger studio, there'll be animators that will do one specific task in that big list, and they'll get really good at that one job, but because he's the only artist, he has to do all of them.
Right.
So it means that like the animations will be kind of, not as good as they could be if we had someone dedicated to just doing animations. But
Right.
that's kind of like the life of being an indie developer. is
Yeah.
Doing the best
I'm
you
always
can.
kind of jealous of teams that have like a small core team that is full-time. Because I feel like I'm always like, I'm full-time. And then now Jeremy, my other developer, is full-time, but that's it. And then everybody else is like contracting or like working, in addition to their day job or whatever.
Mhm.
And so like at least on a virus named Tom, like we went through so many people that came and left the project that it was just like, it's just so taxing, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
for Duskers, it's been way, because like now it's like, the team kind of whittled itself down.
Mhm.
It's been way better, but it's still not like 3 core people that like all tackle an area of the game. That just seems so simple and clean.
Yeah.
And like when
that's
you've
good.
got to juggle all these different people, it's kind of cool because you can have like specialists come in and stuff like that. Like if you're like, oh, well, this person's like really great at animating, and so they're going to animate or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, it's just like, because doing like the producer kind of project management role is it's such a kind of, it's so time consuming. And when you're on a small team, it's like it can kind of start to go away a little bit, I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, like it's easier to manage things because we know what everyone kind of takes charge of their own stuff. But yeah,
Right.
sometimes I wish we had more people.
All right.
What's the question? That was.
Oh no, Pete said that his biggest flaw is that he works so hard it makes other employees feel bad.
Doesn't he just work with Teresa? Isn't that?
Yes. And then Naup says, I remember it was said the Spire was heavily influenced by CPM in terms of movement. Is that still the case?
So the movement is in Spire is kind of, it's meant to be really fast paced. Like to be honest, we've been working on the tech side of things with procedural generation, getting AI to navigate a 3D environment with lots of platforms that are procedurally generated, making the procedural generation interesting, and also being fast enough that you don't have to wait like minutes for
Right.
a room to be generated, because the rooms are more than just stitching pre-made things together. Everything is procedurally generated, so all the shapes and everything. So we haven't actually spent a lot of time on the movement. I've made a character controller that has the functionality that I need. And I've done base movement, but I've only spent maybe a week on that. It's still really fun. It's got wall running, wall jumping, fast movement. It's got it's a sprint button it's not like a sprint like in COD where you have to like hold it down to sprint. It's just a button you press and your character will go into like a kind of running state, which gives you your turn rate kind of changes. So if you turn too sharply, you'll actually go into a slide state. So you don't have the... It's kind of you're committing to a direction. And then if you jump during that and then land, you go into a skid state, so you have to be careful when like jumping from platform to platform. If you do a sprint, then you're committing. It's still really fast. Like there's a grenade launcher in the game, which is a scroll launcher where you shoot scrolls and they explode. So you can use those to grenade jump in the game. There's a lot of items in the game, which are tools that modify your movement. So one of them is it's a disc that you hold that pushes you in the direction you're looking. So if you were to say like accidentally fall off a platform, you can like look up and use the force disc to get back up to the platform. Or if there was a platform that was too far to jump to, you could do like a sprint, wall run, wall jump to the force disc to get to that platform. So it's still really fast. It's probably not going to be quite as fast as CPMA. The reason for that is the game does a lot of decisions that the player needs to make constantly during combat, like figure out which target to single out and deal with. So if it's too quick, then it's not giving the players enough time to really make those decisions. But from like if someone is really good at the controls, they're going to look really graceful jumping around. So it's kind of, because like when you see CPMA players generally 1v1 from all the stuff that I look at, just because it's kind of more interesting with like one person versus another. And it's like a lot easier to have map control when you're only versing one person rather than a team.
Right.
Because a big part of CPMA is like map control, like controlling certain power-ups and the shields and guns and stuff. So you've really only got one target to deal with, but in this game there's a lot of item switching, so you're switching between a handful of different items. So if it's too quick, then it's going to be too hard to make those decisions.
And it's like it's 2-player and it's co-op, right?
Yeah, so you can play through the game single player,
right?
But you can also bring someone in. So it's got networked multiplayer.
Right. There's no versus there.
Not yet. So the networking will handle versus. So the networking model will handle a lot of players in a room together, shooting and jumping around. But right now, all we have planned for the initial release is co-op. And the reason for that is just then we don't have to balance all the items. And if we do a versus mode, then we can select which items we want to be in the versus mode, and even balance those so in versus mode the items react differently in the campaign. Yeah.
That makes sense. Are you doing anything for co-op, like, I mean, obviously you probably are, where like, because it's tough to balance a game that you can play single player and 2-player.
So the game kind of balances itself, because a lot of the power of the player, like the leveling up system in the game, if anyone's played a roguelike called Rogue, it's like a simplified version of NetHack basically, and the developer did a lot of changes to the kind of mechanics of the game. And one of those mechanics is, instead of leveling up by getting experience from killing mobs, like enemies, which basically means if you want to level up in the game, you have to just grind and kill every monster in the level, which is kind of uninteresting in a roguelike, because the whole point is to kind of like pick your own, like how your character is going to interact in the world, and if you're forcing every player to kill every monster to be able to finish the game, that kind of sucks. But so in Rogue, the item to level up is you find an item. It's a potion that you drink, level up potion. So in Versus, we're doing a similar thing where you'll find things that will either improve your right hand or your left hand. And if it's 2-player, you're basically picking which player is the one who gets to use that item. And the other thing is you're going to find an assortment of items on your way up the Spire, and when you find a new weapon, you got to pick which player gets that weapon. So basically, you're like, it's kind of dealing with itself, because you're basically limiting the amount of options each player gets because you're dividing everything by 2.
Right.
So that kind of will help a lot, and the game's just going to be generally hard, so that also helps.
Are you making anything, and are you thinking ahead at least that you're trying to make things that players could use cooperatively, or are you not worrying about that right now?
Not worrying about that too much. Like, it's pretty easy to add a new item to the game, and that's what a lot of the tech has been, is getting all those pipelines of adding content. So if we come up with any like interesting ideas that will mean one player can really help out another player, then it's pretty easy to add that in. But we're mainly focusing on the like single player aspect of it, and the multiplayer is like, it's still a lot of effort to add that with like network multiplayer for co-op, but it's kind of secondary to the experience we want the one player feel to be. So it's more of just like bringing a friend in this world, rather than balancing the two-player mode, so it's like as balanced as the one-player mode. We're balancing the one-player mode, and then you can also bring a friend along, which is going to make it easier because you've got two people firing and two targets running around. But it's like, the point of that is for fun, not for like a difficult experience. It's still going to be really hard. So.
Right. Yeah. Because that's pretty cool. If you can do it, if you can pull it off, then that'll be really nice. Because then you don't have to do all this extra design and development. We'll see. I guess a question here is about the look. What inspired the art direction?
So the art style in Spire is a culmination of a few things. One of them is our artist basically. So when you have one artist, right, you have to pick an art style that still looks good, that is going to be feasible for that artist to be able to make enough assets for the game. So rather than him going for a realistic style, which takes a lot of effort to make textures that look nice, we went for a more easier style to go, so it's all flat shading. Another thing was, rather than our artist having to learn a new skill, he can use the same techniques and art style that we used in Dustforce, which is texturing everything in Flash and then exporting it as a PNG. So he can reuse that. We can reuse all the export scripts we used. So rather than him having to like, oh, how do I do this art style in Photoshop, he can keep using Flash. So it's kind of inspired by Dustforce art. So it's a kind of 3D conversion of that art style.
It's interesting. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh my god! It's like it very much reminded me of Dustforce in 3D.
Yeah. So and then there's like other things, like we have the art style has changed a little bit from when we first kind of announced it. We have some snapshots that look more cel shaded, so the lighting is all banded lighting on the tiles and the interactive props. Whereas now we have a different shader on the tiles that actually light the tiles individually, so a whole tile will be the same luminosity across the entire tile. But the tiles are different shapes, so this is inspired by roguelike lighting, where each tile has its own light value.
Oh, cool.
And if you look at Brogue, it does a really good job at visualizing colors and lighting in the game. So it's kind of a throwback to that, but because it's in 3D and the tiles are different colors, you get this really interesting broken up grid kind of structural look to it that looks very interesting. The reason we chose to do that rather than having the banded lighting on the tiles as well as the interactive props was it got too noisy. It was too hard because most of the lights in the game flicker or are moving, like they're on projectiles, things like that. And if you've got massive bands, banded lighting hitting another banded lighting, you get all these, it's kind of like a blob effect where the two lights meet and you'll get like a blob in between the two lights. It gets really noisy, there's a lot of visual noise, whereas doing lighting each tile individually made it a lot easier to comprehend what was happening.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool. Yeah. It's interesting. I remember when Monaco, like in its first pass, right? It was very much almost. It looked like it was almost tile based, where it was all blocky, and then as they refined the look of it, they made it more, where it was kind of actual lighting with the actual vectors and stuff like that, and it like completely changed like the feel of it or whatever. So it's kind of interesting to play around with that kind of stuff.
And that last thing with the art is the constraint the artist has put on himself is not using any alpha channel. So, and the reason for that is a lot of the time, like pixel art games will use gradients and alphas in their like effects for like when you damage someone or you shoot a gun or something. And it really clashes with the style of a pixelated style using like gradients and stuff. So he's using the constraint of no alpha channel, which has put like a big constraint on the type of things we can do, and we've had to come up with new ways of doing things. So like all the explosions and visual effects in the game, normally you would have a bunch of outfit sprites that you layer to make like a smoke cloud. Instead, we have to use 3D geometry. That like all the explosions in the game are 3D geometry that don't have alpha channel. They're all these solid shapes that have animations on them, which makes everything have a lot of volume. A lot of the time when you use billboarded sprites, things lack volume, so that helps a lot with that too.
That's always kind of cool when you have a seemingly arbitrary constraint, and then how much that affects that forces you to think outside of a box or in a different way, and then you can come up with a solution and that you're happier with. That's definitely happened to me before, where like there's been someone's like we decide on something at one point, and I'm really happy that we did, because it's like I wouldn't have gone this way if I had, just been going in the front door for every decision. So I don't know if you feel that way after doing.
No, it's
all
good.
Of that,
like,
but
a lot of the constraints we put on, what we want the gameplay to be has like influenced what direction we take in decision making and the tech we make. So that's definitely the same thing. So
there was a question about the idea of being able to have a seed value so that you could replay the exact same. Are you guys planning on that?
So there is a seed that things are generated on, but it's not the same as you would see in like Minecraft and things, which is simply a number. All the generation occurs from we have like a experience graph, which is kind of a flow of the pacing of the game. So what types of emotions we want the player to feel, whether it's like claustrophobic or happy or they're kind of all plotted on the graph, as well as like how intense scenes are, how friendly a scene is, how aggressive a scene is, how open spaces are, things like that. So all of those things are kind of the seed data, and all of those get used to generate a procedural dungeon that has interesting flow to it. So it'll feel like it's generated by a human rather than it just being a random noise generator. So that graph itself can be generated from a scene, but that a seed, but that graph itself can also be handcrafted. So it gives us more control than just a random number and hoping that it looks good. We can actually construct one, but we're kind of putting a limit on a seed, because it's kind of like when with emulators, like when I was like 13 or something, and emulators became like this thing that you could download games and play all those old games again. It kind of ruined a lot of games for me, because I could quickly play one and be like, oh, I remember this game, not as good as I remember it, I'm just going to play this game instead. And I would jump around a lot, and I would lose that feeling that I got of being like sucked into a game because it was the only game I could play, So being able to just put in a new seed, like in Minecraft, where it's like you load up a new world, look around, oh, it's not quite as interesting as I want, let's try another one, and you keep going. It kind of makes each individual world less interesting overall, I find. So what we're doing is making it hard to acquire a new Spire, so putting limitations on it, rather than just being able to keep generating a new one. You have to, like, there'll be a global one generated every day, a global one generated every week, and a global one every month that people can compete on. But having a personal seed is a lot harder to acquire, so that will be like there's ways of acquiring them, like finding items in other seeds to like construct a new one, and then you can share that seed with your friends. So you'll have a scroll that is kind of the new layout of a dungeon, and you can invite your friend to come join. And someone might get a really interesting one, like it could just be kind of like a jokes Spire or something, where it's, rather than it being this like really a standard one with enemies and stuff like that, it could simply just be a forest that's a one floor Spire that's just a pretty forest you can walk around in. You could be like, holy shit, look at what this generated, invite your friend to it, and then explore that space. Or it could be the opposite of that, where it's a really aggressive one that has heaps of items in it and heaps of enemies, and it's like kind of a bloodbath, and you've got to try and, well, not a bloodbath, I don't want to use that word, but like really
that's an interesting, really interesting way of doing it. So, in other words, so it's going to be persistent across plays, like their Spire.
Yeah.
So when they start the game and they're like, I just want to play, that'll grab the weekly Spire or the...
Yeah, so they can pick which one they want to compete on, but generally people will play the daily one because every day it gets refreshed. And the Spire that it generates is trying to generate an interesting game flow. So it'd be like,
Right.
you know, oh, we want it to be 2 hours long, we want to have this kind of story arc to it, you know, so you get your ramp up and then it cools down again and then ramps up just before the end and cools down, you know, the standard flow of movies, things like that. Whereas the ones that you generate personally are going to be kind of more interesting and weird, and then that would be fun sharing them with other people.
So when they play through, like, you grab the game, and then you start playing it, right? And you die. And then you start over. It's going to be the exact same Spire?
If it's the daily one, yes.
Yes.
And
then
the
at
personal
midnight
ones,
or something like that, when they restart, all of a sudden it'll be different?
yes.
Interesting.
And we'll
And will there be a way for them to keep it? Or
yeah,
no?
there'll be a back catalog of all the Spires that you've played, so you can go back and play all ones and look at the leaderboards, things like that. But the leaderboards for the daily one will end at the end of the day, and whoever is in the top will get kind of immortalized for a day, and
Right.
the ones who
That's really interesting.
win the weekly one will be immortalized for a week.
That's really interesting because I know with like, and I don't play a ton of Spelunky or anything like that, but I know that they, you know, had like the daily challenge or whatever where everybody got the same and they got one try at it or whatever. But what you're talking about is just almost like integrating that notion into just the core of the game.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
So you guys are going to have a server somewhere that...
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we already have one for Dustforce with all the levels that you can share on that. So
Right.
And the data in it is pretty small per level because it's simply just the graph data that gets generated. So it's not that many numbers, and then the world, your game will generate exactly the same dungeon as someone else that has the.
That's really cool. I don't know if I know of a game like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Someone asked, will there be a level editor? I'm going to say no to that because we don't even have a level editor. So everything, just the way that the level generation works is it's pretty much all automatic. So it's all done through functions. There's no like, I could make an editor that, because the way the generation works is it creates kind of like a voxel representation of the world, and then we turn that voxel representation. It's not like blocks like Minecraft. It's different than that, but that's kind of how we have the data, and it turns that into a 3D mesh. So I could potentially like skip the bit where it starts generating that, but I don't think so.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one because people were talking about that back in the day for when I started Duskers. They were like, oh, could I make my own derelict? And at first, when I started the game, I didn't know if we were going to do it or not, so I didn't bother with any procedural generation. I just made ships, like, and then I explored them, and I'd see if it's fun, and then I reconfigured it, you know.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I was like, all right, let me add the procedural nature, and I started replacing every aspect of it with procedural, and now it's all procedural.
Yeah.
And I intended to leave in the handmade stuff, right? But that's extra work.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing that at the moment. And I'm like, okay, we'll add that back in later because if I have like a story point or something like that, like where there's this room that's been blocked off or whatever, I can do that, right? And that was what I was thinking. And then the more I go, the more I'm in love with just the procedural generation.
Yeah.
And then I start to be like, well, even if I had a story point, it could just be that a door is locked and I could just randomly pick like a room in the ship and have it locked off. And then I started being like, well, obviously, like it's nice when you can generate levels, but I started to ask myself, like, why would a player want to generate a level? Like, is it so that they could make a ship and put like bad guys in it and then like lay it out and then have their friend try to get through it? Because it seems like that would be a whole lot of effort when like the system just does that anyway, and your friends played through like so many ships. It's like, oh, you put the enemy behind this door. I just the use case of it, I'm not sure about. Maybe these guys have an opinion, but it's like I don't know that people would want to, or if maybe they would want to, and then they do it once, and then they'd be like, well, that's dumb because I can just play the game and it's
Yeah.
automatically making these.
So, like, there's arguments both ways. Like, you know, Dustforce gets like 4 custom maps a day uploaded to the server, which is great because it's like there's constantly another 20 minutes of content every day that people can play.
Right.
You know, maybe more if they're not as good at the game. But just because kind of the nature of this game is about like creating and discovering seeds, being able to construct a seed kind of construct a world kind of takes away from that. Because it's really interesting walking into a room that the procedural generation has made and being like, holy shit, look how cool this room is. And if someone can just kind of make that, and I don't know, there's something about it that maybe takes away. I could just be weird, but
Right.
The other thing is like, you can kind of construct, you can construct the idea of a world, but you can't hand construct a world. So you can mess with those graphs, but you can't like place tiles down. So there's kind of a limited version of creating
Right.
levels, and it's more about like seeing what you make and then exploring that space rather than making a space and then I don't know.
Yeah.
No plans.
No plans. Yeah, I mean, and that's interesting too. Like, if instead of an editor, like Pete's kind of saying here, like instead of making an editor where you could, hand place things, if you could either write a script or, like you're saying, like mess with higher level things. Like, okay, like let's just say in Duskers there are ships, and in general we're like, all right, there's not going to be, the ships are going to be between 5 rooms and 25 rooms or whatever, and then someone could mess with that and be like, oh no, I only went from 10 to 15 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like we would have tweaked that to be optimal, but yeah, and I mean, I don't know, and then would you feel an authorship with that? Would you be like, oh, well, I've made it so that there can't be really small ships and really big ships, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, as opposed to, like, I placed this thing here, which I feel like in most traditional level editors, even when I was, like, playing Excite Bike as a kid, like, oh, the ramp goes here, and the next thing goes here, and it's like, that's my level, So, yeah, I don't know what the answer, it's kind of interesting because I want to have, like, sort of, like, community-generated content, but like in a procedurally generated game, I kind of struggle with that because I'm like, I don't know if it makes sense. Yeah.
Kind of takes away
Yeah.
the point of the game, which is discovery. But the roguelike I was talking about was Brogue. Oh, someone already said it. All
right. What about the story? What are you doing in this Spire?
You're trying to get to the top.
Because it's there.
So we have this conversation a lot in our team about game narrative and like the direction the industry. We wrote an article on our website if anyone's interested. It's kind of like our idea of why games are interesting is kind of the opposite of what AAA studios and a lot of independent developers think are good about storytelling in games. And both are valid, like both are good ways of telling stories, but I find telling a story through focusing on the player narrative rather than the explicit narrative is more interesting to me, and that's something that I want to work on. So an explicit narrative is the actual story behind the game, like why are you doing this, and then it could be scripted events like, at this junction in the game, this character is going to die, and there's going to be some scene, whether it's interactable or not, that depicts this person dying, and that's part of the story. So that's the explicit narrative, whereas the player narrative is their second decisions that they make. Do I shoot this enemy first? Do I jump over from this platform to this platform? And like most people be like, oh, that's just a game, but like generally in games, there's not that many decisions that you can actually make. It's pretty basic. So it'd be like a corridor that you walk down and you just kill all the enemies in that corridor. Like what happens if your game, you could make more decisions, like not killing those enemies, not going into that room, using certain items at certain times. Like in Brogue and most roguelikes, you really get this experience where the player narrative is really important, and it's like, oh, I was like, something that happened to me in Brogue was I was on a bridge and there was monsters coming from either side, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna die because I can't fight them off. And I like looked in my inventory and I had a potion and it was unidentified. I didn't know what it was, and I was hoping it was like levitation or heal so I wouldn't die. and I drank it, and it was a potion of incineration. So it set me on fire, and it set the bridge on fire, and then the bridge gave way, and I fell. And then I fell to the next level and landed in water, which put the fire out. And then a bunch of the other enemies fell and died because they hit the ground. But then one of them fell and hit a bog, which set off an explosion, which killed all the enemies that were like right where I landed, because I landed in the water, so I was safe. And it's like that experience there that I just had is like, I had that experience.
Yeah.
That was my experience. Like, and that's really interesting to me when you get that kind of experience from a video game, rather than like, oh, at this point in the story, this character dies.
Right.
Because it feels like, holy shit, like I just experienced something. Whereas the explicit narrative is like, oh, I was just told the story.
Yeah, and you have, I find that with a lot of procedurally like generated content games that you get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of a sudden you'll sit there and you'll be comparing notes, and even in games that are just massive, right? Like I remember when Holly and I were both playing Oblivion.
Yeah.
And we'd like exchange stories, because even though those were semi-scripted events, we were both playing, and the world was so big that we weren't in the same areas, so we could like tell each other about that stuff. And then the opposite is when, it's one story, and then it's a lot more like a TV show or movie, and the cool thing about that is that you can talk about it, because you both experience the same thing, so you can be like, oh my god, I can't believe that I don't want to ruin anything in Game of Thrones, but like, you have that experience with people. So I think both are super valid, and I'm definitely like getting that, like, because that's what Alex is always saying with Sub Rosa, and then you hear people talk about DayZ or whatever, and they've got these like stories that they tell, and they'll write blog posts on it, and that's exciting because that happened to them, and that's why they're excited about it. It's a lot like why you tell a story about your day. Mm-hmm. Like, dude, I was walking down the street and like this car exploded or whatever. It's like, I would tell you that, right? And so that's what you're trying to get at. And so facilitating that is really important, I think. And that's why, like, even when I was pitching Duskers, I realized, like, when I was making my little pitch video, I was like, this is the core of the game. This is that someone's going to go and do something. They're going to be stuck in this place, and they're going to have a certain set of upgrades, and they're going to be like, I'm totally hosed. There's nothing I can do. And then they're going to be like I call it that MacGyver moment, where they're like, oh my god, what if I did this, that, and the other thing? Yeah. And then I ran through the door, and whatever happened, and even if it works or if it doesn't work, as long as they had that chance and something exciting happened, then you've kind of got that moment, which is always pretty cool. Yeah. And I'm excited about that, because I haven't... You even get those stories sort of when you make a game that isn't procedurally generated, but like, like our previous games were very, like defined, like they were deterministic and stuff like that. So it's like you hear some stuff, but I'm kind of excited and horrified to actually watch people play and be like, like a completely different experience. I mean, not completely different. There's within the realm of the game, but that's exciting.
Have we finished those 5 questions yet?
We have not. You want to go back to the 5 questions?
Sure, what's the next one?
What do you like least about your last or current job?
My last job was fixing computers at a computer store. And I actually didn't mind that job. Like, I had to run around a lot, and it was kind of a lot of, like, a big workload. Right. But it was actually pretty cruisy in comparison, I think. Right. The thing I don't like about this job is how long everything takes. I think is, like, it just takes so long to make something.
Yeah, it can be pretty frustrating.
Like, especially if you're trying to make, like, interesting tech, or pretty much just interesting tech. It just takes so long. And, like, there's all these libraries and stuff out there that people are like, hey, look, here's this library that, like, solves your problem, and you, like, download it, and you learn how to use it, and you're just like, actually, this is shit. And you have to do it all yourself anyway, and it's, like, I pretty much run into that with every aspect of this game. It's just like, oh, Unity can do that. Nope, can't do that. Oh, here's this plugin that helps with pathfinding. Nope.
Yeah.
So
it's super. I guess it's frustrating. It was frustrating for me at first because when I left DreamWorks, I was used to being on large teams, right? So you're like, oh, like make this beautiful like explosion, right? And everybody works on a piece of it and it gets done, right? And then all of a sudden it's like just you, and you're like, crap, I have to, and like I had to recalibrate my brain, because I'd be like, and not only that, but then when I was working in my spare time, you're working like 10 hours a week or whatever like that, you know, and it's just like, oh my god, like this game has not moved forward at all.
Hasn't progressed.
Right, and then even now, like full time and stuff like that. I mean, we're lucky in the sense that, yeah, Duskers isn't pushing tech beyond any boundary or anything like that. It's all the stuff we've done so far has pretty much been like within the realm. I mean, we'll probably hit performance problems and stuff like that eventually, but like everything is within that. But yeah, when I look over at like all the crazy ambitious stuff you guys are doing, I'm like, wow. And I mean, and I still feel like it takes forever to get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty frustrating.
Hey, Dustforce crew just rocked up.
What's up?
Dustforce crew is here, apparently, waving some flags. Shout out to Ted.
Oh. Do you have, let me see.
So the story, so there is a story in the game, but we're kind of portraying that through the props that you see. Like there's a lot of tapestries in the game that will depict scenes, and it's kind of up to the player to interpret those and figure out what happened. So nothing is like explicitly told to the player. They've got to work out why they're going to the top of the tower themselves. And we're not sure if we're even going to make that clear. Like, it could just be that the player comes up with their own idea why they're going to the top of the tower.
Right.
Rather than being like, you get to the top of the tower and you're like, oh, the whole reason was to put this key in this thing. That's why I was doing this. Like,
right.
So I don't know. We'll see where that goes.
So this is kind of an interesting question. Do you have anything to say on finishing a project? How many abandoned ideas projects do you go through before you settle on something that you're happy continuing? Do you have any advice on not beating yourself up on something that just doesn't work?
So I haven't been making games for very long. So I had a lot of projects in high school, which were just me learning how to program. So I'd be like, oh, I want to make an RTS and like figure out how to do simple pathfinding and unit selection and stuff. And it would go as far as like I have a building that can make units, and those units can move and shoot other units, and units can die. And like I would make that as a prototype. So none of those were meant to be like a finished game. So it was just me like giving myself a task and figuring out how to like program that, and that was how I taught myself how to program. When I actually started trying to make a video game, I only made one project before Dustforce. So this was like years after I dropped out of college because I wasn't learning anything. It was costing me too much money. So I dropped out and went and got a job to pay off my student loans. And Woodley, our artist, he stayed at college and finished his degree. And then about 2 years after he finished his degree, he hadn't made anything either, and I was just still paying off student loans because they're expensive. He basically came to me and was like, we need to like stop fucking around and we should make a video game. So we started out and we were making a game. It's called Mandible, and I still want to make it. And it's this game where it's like a side-scroller shooter, like like R-Type thing. Except you're a giant dragon that's been sleeping in the center of the earth, and you basically come out and you're just like absolutely obliterating everything.
You pissed.
And I'm pretty sure you can't die in the game, and like if you get shot, like blood comes out and stuff. But it's just like an action-packed game that you're just trying to lay waste. And the point of it was to give people the feeling of like just ruining things, right? So we started on that project, and we were about 2 months in, and like we had it kind of working, and we hit this design hurdle where we were like, oh, we can fix this by going this direction, or we can go this direction, and we went down the wrong path, and it screwed the design of the game up, and we were just like, this isn't a good game, we need to stop. So we stopped and we started on Dustforce, and then we made the prototype for Dustforce, and it was good, and we made the full version of Dustforce. And then after Dustforce, I messed around with a couple of like programming prototypes that weren't planning to be a full game. It was just me like, oh, I should learn how to code better. So, but none of them are really like, oh, I'm gonna make this game and then I fail at it. It was only Mandible, but I know how to fix Mandible now, so that might be a game in the future. We figured out like years later where we went wrong in the design choice, and if we go back to that point, take a different path. That's kind of cool. but I made like a bunch of little prototypes. Like I have a little forklift
The
game I
forklift
made.
game is fun.
I made another game in a game jam that you are a little fish. It's inspired by Journey. It was before Journey got released. I actually got to meet that game company and play a early version of Journey. So after playing that, Global Game Jam came up and I made a jam game, which is you're a fish and you're looking for other fish in a procedurally generated coral reef. It's a networked game, and it only works on Windows XP, so I can't play it anymore. So yeah, I haven't really failed any projects except for Mandible, but I still want to go back to it one day. So yeah, I haven't. Like I hear a lot from developers like starting a project and it failing. I think it's just the people I work with, even though like at times we lack inspiration and go through our lulls and like motivation, we still get through it and get it done. So it's probably just because good teammates, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I've definitely
good
had
team dynamics.
I've definitely had like projects that have died for a whole slew of reasons, and usually that's it. Usually it's that either you didn't know what you were doing, or the people you were working with ultimately you don't see eye to eye with, and you just want to go in different directions. And that's actually how I started everything. Like I was with one team, and then it just wasn't working out. But I kept kind of latching onto them a little bit because there were other people that were excited about it, and it's nice to have a workout partner. Doing it by yourself is tough, and that's when it became Holly and I, because I was just like super frustrated, and Holly was just like looking at me, and she's like, we have the skills to do everything. Like we're not going to be great at everything we do, but like right now, if we just want to make a game, and I see you're frustrated, and like I think you could make a game, like why don't we just do this ourselves? Yeah. Which is just insane. A married couple being like, oh yeah, let's just work together on this incredibly stressful, difficult project.
If it fails, we won't be fucking anything.
Yeah, it'll be fine. That'll be totally fine, and we'll have a kid. I don't know what we were doing, but anyway, all right. So we have time for what is the other question? Oh, I love this one. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Hopefully finish with Spire. But no, it would be making. So after Spire, I have like an idea for a bunch of games that are all movement based because that's what I find interesting. But I'm planning on them only being like 6-month projects because I can use a lot of the tech from Spire, mainly the networking code, which you can't do, by the way. That's another thing. So I'm going to use that and make this idea that I've had. So I want to get out, like, after Spire, I want to get out a bunch of little projects and maybe kind of prototype them, release them for free or something, and maybe turn one of them into a full game. But, I don't think I'll take up another big project. So in 5 years, I will have, like, 4 more games released. That's my goal.
That's a cool goal.
Yeah.
You might be able to do it.
Maybe.
You might be able to do it, because I always, like, whenever anybody says, oh yeah, I'm going to make a smaller game and I'm going to get something done in 6 months, you always roll the eyes, because it's always like, yeah, that's what we always intend to do. But after going through, the dev cycle that you were going through on Spire and stuff like that, I could see that. Yeah. I mean, like, you cranked out that forklift game in, like, half a minute, so... And it's fun. Yeah. So it's like, you could definitely get out some prototypes. I mean, I think that's what I went through after A Virus Named Tom. I think I was just so burnt out, and I was afraid to start another project because I didn't have the money. Mm-hmm. So I just started making prototypes. Mm-hmm. All the ideas that I had, I was like, let me make a bunch of them, and then we'll see which one is good. Yeah. But then I was kind of starting to fall in love with all of them, which is like, so I'm probably, in theory, like, I would like to make all 3 of them. Yeah. Which is weird, because I thought I'd be like, oh, I'll make 3 of them, and 2 of them will be horrible, and 1 of them will be great, and so, Mm-hmm. And I just kind of liked them all. And then the community didn't help me at all either.
Just divided votes on which game to make.
Yeah, it was like 30. It was like 30 to 31 to 33 or something like that. Yeah. And I was just like, all right. It was kind of freeing in a way because it's like, okay, I can make what I want. Yeah. And you guys are kind of like, I'll support you in a way, But I was really looking to get out of a decision with that one. Of course, I guess I got out of a decision in a way because I was like, I need money. Yeah. And so whatever I can get money, and I got money for Duskers, and it's like, we're making Duskers. Yeah. Yeah. And then the last question is tell me about a time that you failed.
So we kind of went over my game history, which I haven't really done a big failure there. I don't know. Like, it would probably be like some early memory that's completely unrelated to game development. I think.
Well, it can be
Like, I've been
unrelated.
pretty good with game dev stuff, so.
Yeah. I guess you could say that time where you guys chose the wrong path on the design.
Yeah.
So, could you give a quick summary of that? Like, what was the path you went down and what was the problem?
The game is a game where you play as a giant serpent dragon thing flying through the sky, eating what now is the inhabitants of Earth. And
You're very angry.
they're robots now. They're not humans.
Oh, it's fine then. Or Nazis, either way.
Yeah. I heard people like those, or zombies.
Zombies.
I heard those are in.
It's okay to kill zombies.
But so the game was a really visceral game that you're like eating all these spaceships and ripping parts off them and flinging them at other people. And we were like, hey, what if you could shoot? You know? And so we added all these mechanics of shooting, like, oh, if you eat like enough stuff, then you can spew out like hot molten metal, and that's how you can have to kill some enemies. So you gotta dodge them long enough and eat enough stuff and then finish them off. Or like, oh, what happens if there's spines on your back that, you know, you can either shoot them out or like charge up and shoot them out. And we went over all these different iterations of like how the player was going to shoot, and it just screwed the game up. And later on we realized that like the player doesn't shoot, and that's how you fix the problem, because ripping things apart with your mouse and throwing them at people is really fun. So
right.
Why add shooting to that? And the shooting was just like really unimpacty, because you just sit back going, and it's like the whole point of the game was this visceral game where you're like ramming into stuff and ripping things apart, and like fluid would go everywhere from the robots, and it just lost all of that as soon as you added shooting.
Isn't that funny how sometimes there's like this like really simple solution, like, hey, we're having a problem with shooting, why don't we remove the shooting? Right? Like that happened. That was, I remember, I always talk about on Duskers, I was having trouble because I think either it was because I had the tower defense elements at that point, or I was just having combat, and the combat felt just stale, and there was always like a single solution, or not a single solution, but there was like an optimal solution for like everything in that set, and then all of a sudden I would be like, you know, like, I went to Alex, and I was just like, dude, I'm having so much trouble with the combat, and I explained, for like 5 minutes, I explained all my problems, and he was like, so what if you didn't have combat?
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, as soon as you take a path, like a design decision, where, like, our design decision was like, oh, what, you shoot now, how are we going to solve this? And your own was like, there's combat in the game, how are you going to solve that? As soon as you take that path, it's so hard to, like, walk back on that. And it, like, you know, sometimes takes asking someone else, or it sometimes takes dropping the project and walking away for a year, and then being like, oh, obvious, you just don't shoot.
Right.
You know, you don't.
Yeah, like why? Like we were trying to add some feature that wasn't core to the game, and then we just, you know, you started spinning. Yeah. And sometimes that's the thing, is like you have a design problem and you're just obsessed with it, right?
Yeah. That's pretty funny right now.
Are they getting silly?
Yeah. Anyway.
No love life?
Like failures?
I've got plenty of them.
Not like bad ones. Like there's been relationships that ended, but you know, it's probably all for the better, because we grew apart in some way or another.
Yeah.
No regrets.
But to finish up that thought on, like, you know, the advice, so what was interesting about that to me is that it wasn't that having combat in the game was a problem. It was the fact that I was focusing on combat. Yeah. So as soon as he said, what if there was no combat, that pushed the pendulum like so far on the other end that it changed my mindset. So eventually I removed all the combat. And then eventually I added the combat in, but I added the combat in as like flavoring, where like the focus of the game was actually avoiding combat most of the time. But then I was like, it'd still be cool if you could pick up a Gatling gun and just go to town after, like... Yeah. And I knew that I was going to... Because I was going to break upgrades, you could... Like, even if you go to town with a Gatling gun or whatever, it's eventually going to it's eventually going to break, and I know that you're not going to just keep going with that.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things where what I really needed was, that something to push me really hard in the other direction so I could see, like, it's almost like, I walked down that path and he pushed me all the way back.
Yeah.
And now I integrate part of that path, but it's just like I look at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
And that's really cool.
Yeah.